And now we have three, terrific people that I want to first have them say a few words about who they are, and then I'm going to invite my colleague Alan to, transition the conversation into, the next topic. So why don't we just go one by one? Brent, can you just go ahead?
Yeah, as everyone can hear me. I'm Dr. Brent Mansour. I am a reproductive endocrinologist, and I have a practice in Silicon Valley that's based at Stanford University. I'm also on the committee for developing guidelines for LGBTQ family building with the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. And my research team has produced the largest assessments of sexual and gender minorities using medically assisted reproduction to build their families. So not just focused on cisgender, gay, or single men, but also for transgender, gender expansive individuals, and sexual minority women.
Hi everyone, my name is Mimi Demiso. I'm the Executive Director of Our Family Coalition. Our Family Coalition is an organization that's been around for 25 years in the Bay Area. Our entire mission is to support LGBTQ families in the full expanding spectrum of what LGBTQ means to have children, and we advocate for LGBTQ families through education, support programs, and in fact, we just recently co-sponsored Senate Bill 729 so that we can expand fertility coverage. And once you do have your children, you're probably going to want to meet more parents who look like you and also go through all the regular problems of trying to raise a toddler or a teenager. And we have all of those types of support systems in place, and also provide a lot of advocacy once you go into the school system, which is another challenge of raising a kid and within your own family structure, and then having your kids go to school and being taught something else, or having your families being excluded from the lessons that your children are receiving. So that's another large part of the work that we do is in education.
Hi, I'm Deborah Wald. I'm a practicing attorney here in the Bay Area. I've actually been in my law practice doing LGBTQ family building as well as litigating on behalf of LGBTQ parents for almost 30 years now. I'm here today on this panel primarily though as the chair of the National Family Law Advisory Council of the National Center for Lesbian Rights. NCLR has been one of the foremost legal organizations in the country litigating on behalf of lesbian, gay, and trans families and youth. And so it's actually a huge honor for me to be the chair of the National Family Law Advisory Council, which represents about 30 states, and is essentially a think tank of attorneys who do this work on the ground, where we come together and talk about what's working and what isn't, and strategies for better protecting our families. And I will just say, we go through ebbs and flows. Since Obergefell, we had a little ebb of them sort of NCLR not needing so much input, and it is wild out there right now. So I'm really glad you're here. It's a good moment to be talking about these issues because they're back in the forefront.
And Alan Campbell is a research associate, and he's going to say a few words about why this is not just an advocacy, but an advocacy and research forum, and help us transition to what we'd like to cover more this evening.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here and to be able to speak with you tonight. A little bit, I'm going to start focusing on the research piece. Ron shared what we do with our advocacy agenda. I'm going to talk a little bit about how research informs what we do. Can I get the screen on, please? Thank you. So as Ron mentioned, our ethical framework very clearly states that we believe that medical and social science research is necessary for us to promote and carry out ethical surrogacy. So research is important to us as an organization because we believe it helps us do what we're meant to do in promoting ethical surrogacy. Some of the research that we know so far from what we've gathered is that we've got really good scientific data about experiences and the psychological outcomes of being a surrogate. We know a lot from research about the impact that surrogacy can have on surrogates and their families and their children. We have great social science and psychological research about the outcomes for children that are born through surrogacy, and we know a lot about those psychological outcomes for the families. So when we look at research, we understand how important it is for us as things change and evolve, as we continue to develop what these best practices are. We do use research to help inform those decisions and recommendations that turn into documents like an ethical framework. Some of the things that we know from research, here's an example of a book that was written that kind of takes the stigma and then compares it to reality. So we've got stigma related to some of the people that choose to become surrogates, and we know that some of these misconceptions are such that like surrogates have a hard time, they have to give up a child, or that pregnancy isn't pleasurable to anyone, and there's no way that someone might do this because they want to, or that surrogates are coerced or induced. And we know that the reality based on research is the opposite, and we've got loads of data about this, right? And we have longitudinal studies going back almost 30 years that we can look to. Men Having Babies has a great resource here at menhavingbabies.org/books. You can see all of our recommended reading. It's not just kids' books. We've got lots of our research-based books that are in our book list. And then we also have a research library that shows just study upon study upon study that might be interesting to you if you want to look deeper into these issues. Talking about surrogates, we believe that a well-screened surrogate is really the starting point to help us have such great outcomes. We believe that the research has showed us that screening is really the starting point to help us have success in what we believe to be ethical surrogacy. And so just a quick look at the demographics shows that we can see that some of these stigmas that people might think about don't necessarily hold true. When we look at household income or age or family status, we can see that based on data from research that some of those misconceptions that are held in society just simply aren't true. We do know that, again, this is just an example of what research has showed us, that we believe that starting with a well-screened surrogate process really does benefit the entire journey and all those that are involved in this very multi-dimensional aspect of building a family. Not to overwhelm you, but this is just a little bit of the data that we have. We're really excited that we host a research library. It is multidisciplinary. We have research from basically every scientific field that may be related to either LGBTQ family building or specifically to surrogacy. It's at our website, /research, so feel free to take a look at that. And we've got some new documents that we're going to be publishing that make it a little bit easier to consume some of this sometimes heavy scientific and academic data. I do want to just finish and say that some of the things that are happening right now in academia and in other institutions that carry out research, the number one takeaway I want you to realize is that it's multidisciplinary. There's research happening in all of the fields. So just to name a few: psychology, social anthropology, reproductive sociology, family studies, and ethnography. We've got active research happening in just the legal fields. You've heard a lot about legal. There's 2 great centers that are dedicated to studying the legal aspects of building families in unique ways. Media studies, there's some really interesting research about how the media is influencing commonly held perceptions about surrogacy. And we've got some researchers in Europe that are doing some really deep research about media and the way it influences the way people think about how we build our families. And last but not least, I want to talk about how important it is for us in managing the risk associated with surrogacy. We know that one of the fundamental ethical questions as relates to surrogacy as a way to build families is about whether or not we can justify the medical risk to the surrogate, right? There's a high risk. How do we justify that? One of the things that we have to take into account is that medical research is absolutely necessary so we can do everything we can to reduce that risk. And that's one of the fundamental aspects of our ethical framework, is reducing the medical risk to the surrogate so that it can be justified as a way to build our family. So with that, I'm pleased to introduce Dr. Mansour to come talk about his research, about what he's doing, and to share a little bit about what he's got published so far and what he's working on moving forward that will again contribute to the literature and to then our ability to continue to promote ethical surrogacy practices. So with that, Dr. Mansour.
Speak from here, or it's up to you. I can go up there.
Let's see, am I double mic'd or am I good? Good to go. So thank you, Alan, for the introduction, and thank you, Ron, for the opportunity to talk. So as I alluded to, in the fall, I will be joining the faculty at Stanford University, and I will be the director of the nation's first LGBTQ family building clinical research program. And so we will track decision-making and clinical outcomes for all sexual and gender minorities that are using medically assisted reproduction to build their families. We'll also complement the work that's already being done with the PRIDE study. For those of you that are familiar, that's the largest long-term national study that is tracking health outcomes in LGBTQ individuals. Many of you are likely eligible, and if you'd like to learn more, you can do so at pridestudy.org. But until we get this data that we're going to collect moving forward, we've been doing some research using databases that uniquely have information both on sexual orientation as well as use of assisted reproductive technologies. Most recently, last year, my research team partnered with a fertility benefits company to look at the largest cohort of US men that were using gestational carriers and egg donors to build their families. And what we found primarily echoed smaller studies done regionally across the country, which shows that men having babies primarily use egg donation and gestational carrier in an agency-based way. And those that are in couples, there is a focus to have 2 children, often with both producing sperm samples to be used. And a couple other findings showing that genetic testing is very common. But I think the findings that I wanted to focus on tonight, there are 2. The first is that in every man that was in our study that we followed nationally, every single one of them achieved a pregnancy after an embryo transfer. And because of a very low miscarriage rate, over 85% achieved a live birth, a healthy baby being delivered. And this is in stark contrast to what fertility clinics usually see and the success rates that we usually have, because we're often taking care of a community that may have infertility or a specific medical diagnosis that decreases those success rates. And so what we posit is that our community, the men having babies community, actually sets the new gold standard for a modern fertility clinic. We have the ideal ingredients, oftentimes 1 or more sperm sources. We have the use of a healthy young egg donor, as well as a proven uterus. So with these ideal ingredients, it really sets the cap of what success can look like at a fertility clinic. And so I think that's something that we really have to highlight because we kind of will show the limit of current technologies and how we can be successful. The other thing that I wanted to highlight is that while most of the men in our study did pursue with a single embryo transfer, over a quarter did use more than 1 embryo being placed back, or a double embryo transfer. This is important because this is a divergence from best practices as published from the American Society for Reproductive Medicine. And we think that this is often done because of perceived increase in success by putting back more than 1, or there may be a perception that you'll decrease cost because you can kind of do 2 and have the 2 children right away. But the reality is that there is substantial increased risk, both to the intended parents, to the future child or children, and the gestational carrier, due to the risks and complications associated with twin, triplets, and other higher order pregnancies. The reason I bring this up is as we transition into this panel and talking about advocacy and an ethical framework, I'll share data from the Society for Assisted Reproductive Technologies. This has never been reported, and our research team will be publishing on this later this year. However, as of 2018, men using a combined egg donation and a gestational carrier actually represent the majority of all treatment cycles in the United States. And so that means that our community has a responsibility to be stewards of ethical guidelines and how we are using surrogates. And I think I just want to end by saying that every one of us in this room, whether professionally and or personally involved in this men having babies journey, we are transforming the definition of the traditional family and kinship, and we can work together as we have this next gay baby boom, or gayby boom as it's been called in the literature, to really kind of decide what are the best practices and what is the way that we can do this in the most ethical approach moving forward.
Wonderful. Let me just say, by the way, that the slides you saw before when Alan was speaking were part of a series of presentations that we provided virtually to legislators in the European Parliament. Several different parties in the European Parliament have, as they are discussing this issue of surrogacy, have been inviting us to talk to their members of Parliament about our position regarding surrogacy. And this is a small part of that position, about that presentation. And we were often, not often, always, contrasted with people who came from anti-surrogacy groups that are very organized and focused and vocal in Europe, so much so that they are behind some legislation. One of them passed recently in Spain that defines surrogacy as violence against women. And we would have an opponent in these discussions that would repeat this term many times, but never once show any evidence in research or in, you know, any type of accepted reasonable logic why this is the case, which is why it is very important for us to have research. But when we have research, you know, we can, I mean, sometimes it sounds like we're faking a bit because, you know, we're selecting the group that we're researching. So we're selecting, you know, the best, you know, candidates to be surrogates, and then, lo and behold, you know, the outcomes are good. You know, we have a self-selected group of parents who are willing to, you know, go through huge lengths to become parents, and lo and behold, they're good parents, you know. But in our case, this is not cheating. This is exactly what we're trying to say. What we're trying to say is that it's not about whether or not you should do it, but how. So if you select, if you make sure that the risks are minimal, and if you follow protocols that are, you know, for you know, ethical treatment, and if you know, then the outcomes are good. So we're researching whether the outcomes of our protocols are successful, and the answer is yes.